I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, sir. We'll turn our attention to the hearing on 2335. Adam, can we get a briefing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2335 would authorize loans or grants from certain qualified track maintenance in the Rail Service Improvement Program. It increases the transfer from the State Highway Fund to the Rail Service Improvement Fund. Kind of the two elements of the bill is the current Rail Service Improvement Fund could now be used for qualified track maintenance, which is a defined term under the bill as, as gross expenditures for the maintenance, reconstruction, or replacement of railroad track, including roadbed, bridges, industrial leads, and side track and related track structures to the extent the expenditures are on track located in the state of Kansas and such track was owned or leased by a qualified entity. The entities would be limited to Class 2 and Class 3 railroads. Class 1 railroads would be excluded. And also an additional provision would increase the yearly transfer from what is currently $5 million to what will be $10 million on July 1 of 2023 and thereafter. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Adam? Seeing none, thank you, sir. First proponent, Matt Messina. Welcome to the committee.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Matt Messina, and I currently serve as KDOT's Bureau Chief of Multimodal Transportation. The Bureau is responsible for administering federal and state transportation funds for a variety of programs related to ped bike, public transportation, electric vehicles and alternative fuels, and today's topic, freight and rail. I thank you for the opportunity this morning to provide testimony on House Bill 2335 and provide our comments. As you know, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program introduced a new rail program for fiscal years 21, 22, and 23. This was only a 3-year program that recently came to its end for the Short Line Railroad Improvement Fund. This program fund had $5 million per year in addition to our existing program, which had another $5 million per year, known as the Rail Service Improvement Fund. Both programs were oversubscribed, being popular with our short line railroads and the local shippers along them. Eligible activities include maintaining existing rail infrastructure, rehab of spurs and siding, and major rehab projects. The Short Line Fund had unawarded projects totaling over $16 million over the past 2 years. KDOT's key to supporting this bill is the combination of the two programs becoming one. We always seek ways to meet the needs of the people we serve and create efficiencies for the agencies. These programs are very similar, but they had key differences of eligibility of track owners, which this bill addresses, allowing any track owners along our short line railroad network to be eligible. This is important to our local shippers, especially those related to our agriculture industry. And in recent years, we were unable to award maintenance, but this new program would allow for that. The past few years, KDOT has administered 2 separate programs with slight differences, meaning KDOT staff would go through the same process twice to administer funds for similar projects through both programs. Combining these programs would improve internal efficiencies, meet the needs of interested parties, expanding eligibilities, and simplifying the application process and timeline for our railroad partners. I'd like to thank you again for giving us the opportunity to testify on this House bill, and I'm happy to stand for any questions if there are any.
Committee questions. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Matt, for your presentation. I'm familiar with your work, and I really appreciate all you do for the transportation systems we have within the state of Kansas, but on behalf of KDOT especially. So I have a few questions, just to be clear. I was just talking to Merrill earlier this morning. So both the State Highway Fund and the Rail Service Improvement Funds are both under KDOT, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if you're asking for an additional $5 million out of the State Highway Fund, was that money already allotted for other projects? And if so, what's going to happen to those projects?
I wouldn't say that it was allotted for other projects. For the past 3 years, it had been set up for this program fund, which has sunsetted. So it would not be additional money. It would just be the transfer of another $5 million into the existing continued program.
So was it not designated for anything else, is my question, I guess?
That specific $5 million, I could not speak to its designation for beyond 2023.
And my other question, in addition to the KDOT funds, I sometimes don't like the shell game from, I feel like if it's in KDOT, that we're just moving those funds to a different line item. If possible, would it be good to have it from the State General Fund and use that $5 million in KDOT that's requesting for the transfer to be used for those projects that it might have been designated for?
I guess I'm not fully understanding the question there. So the funds are already set up for KDOT to have for its programs. So it's not any real transfer away from what KDOT is expected to use their funds for.
Okay, that's good. I was just thinking that probably those funds were allocated for something else and maybe not to transfer it into this one. And if it would matter if it came out of a different, as long as the $5 million was transferred to make it $10 million whole, if it matters where it came from was my question, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess I can't speak to if that would matter or not, but I think the $10 million to support this program as a combined one has been identified as a clear need.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, further questions for Matt? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Randy Stuckey.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. Randy Stuka this morning on behalf of the Kansas Grain and Feed Association and the Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association. So we do stand in strong support of this bill this morning. It would be the $5 million in the RSIF and then the other $5 million in the other Rail Service Improvement Fund that's being brought together for $10 million that was used for short line rail, will continue to be used for short line rail. That's what the bill does. Why is it important? Why is it important to our members? Our members are grain elevators in the state of Kansas and ag retailers in the state of Kansas. So we both ship out grain from our facilities and we receive ag inputs in our facilities. You only get those ag inputs across the state of Kansas to the farmers in two ways. You either put it on a rail and get it there cheaply and efficiently, or you put it there on a truck. And if we don't have short line rail across the state of Kansas, that our testimony, you're seeing the written testimony from KDOT, they estimated thousands of semi trucks in every year, a day, but tens of thousands a year would be going from short line rail onto semi trucks. And when we love our truckers, we love that transportation system, we love the highway system that we support. But if we don't have the short line rail, and if we don't invest in it, we won't. That's the whole bottom line here. We continue to lose short line rail access across the state of Kansas and have for decades. And that's what happens when you don't invest into that infrastructure. And so if we lose it, and if we don't continue to invest in it, we will lose it. All that transportation is going to be shipped onto the highways with commercial trucks. And what does that do? We have trucks, and it's more wear and tear, certainly on those rural areas that can't afford to maintain those Kansas roads themselves. So that's on the front end where you receive the ag inputs. On the back end, same issue. What happens if you lose the short line rail access to the grain elevators, then that lowers the cash price that your farmer can receive for his grain because the basis costs increase for the elevator. It means their shipping costs to get the grain from that elevator to wherever it's going, to a mill or export, those costs are increased if you do it by truck rather than by rail, which means the price to the farmer goes down. And if the price to the farmer goes down, then two things happen. You lower the property value of the grain elevator itself, and then you lower the values of those farms because their revenue streams go down. This has a ripple effect if we don't continue to invest in the rail system in our state. So for those reasons, we certainly stand in strong support of this bill, this legislation, which is one of our key pieces of legislation for the year. We thank KDOT for working with us over the interim to identify that the Short Line Rail Investment Fund was going to expire in 2023. And so to keep that program alive and for administrative efficiencies, to put those two existing programs into one program and keep that $10 million of investment, which is not that much investment when you think about the infrastructure of the short line rail system in the state of Kansas. We'd certainly, and the bill passed 116 to 5, or 117 to 5 rather, in the House, bipartisan support, broad support. We certainly hope that it passes favorably from this committee. Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions at the appropriate time.
Committee questions for Randy. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I'm going to follow up on what Senator Reddy asked because I'm a little confused. What are the two existing programs?
So the Rail Service Improvement Fund, which grain shippers of all kinds do not have access to directly. They have to go through, submit a project to their rail, their adjacent rail that they're on, and then the rail approves that plan and submits it to KDOT. So we've never been able to access that Rail Service Improvement Fund. The second was the Short Line Rail Improvement Fund that was passed as a part of the Eisenhower Highway Program. And because that was a 3-year proviso that expires this year, but the demand for that program certainly, as was just mentioned, exceeded the ability of the total size of that fund, both the RSIF and the Short Line Rail Improvement Fund. Shippers have received about half of the 50% of the Short Line Rail Improvement Fund over the last 3 years, each year, give or take. So and certainly there is higher demand yet for very good projects to invest in that short line rail. We're talking about the rail siding here, the spur that comes off, to allow for continued access on that short line for the shippers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions for Randy? Seeing none, next up, Shahira Stafford.
Good morning, Chairman Peterson and members of the Transportation Committee. I'm Shahira Stafford. I'm here representing the Kansas Cooperative Council today. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to comment on House Bill 2335. The Co-op Council is a statewide trade association. We represent all cooperatively structured businesses. Having said that, the majority of our members are ag retail co-ops, so we spend most of our time in the ag space. Our agriculture cooperatives have robust grain and agronomy operations that rely heavily on rail transport to transport product to market. As you know, most of our co-ops are in rural communities, and we use the short line railroads to access the national freight network, ultimately exporting corn, wheat, sorghum, and other commodities, both domestically and overseas. Many of our members purchase or lease the land at our facilities, which means that we must maintain many feet of the short line siding ourselves. In 2021, one of our cooperatives spent $60,000 to upgrade the siding at 3 of their locations. This $60,000 investment upgraded only a total of 1/8 of a mile of short line siding. House Bill 2335 combines 2 existing short line rail improvement programs into one within the Kansas Department of Transportation, and it does that without asking for additional state general fund dollars. This program encourages private and public partnerships that invest in short line maintenance and repairs that are defined in the bill. Several of our co-ops have already participated in the short line rail improvement program over the past 3 years and have been able to make improvements to their siding that were severely needed and may have otherwise been cost prohibitive. We believe that continuing this program will further ensure rail service to our small towns and spur additional short line infrastructure investment. Being able to move more commodities in less time will greatly benefit our local co-ops and the entire agricultural production chain. So thank you for allowing me to comment on House Bill 2335, and I'd be happy to stand for questions when appropriate.
Committee questions for Shahira? See none, thank you.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Ross Lane. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ross Lane. I'm with Assistant Vice President of Government Affairs for Genesee and Wyoming Railroad Holding Company, and I'm here today representing the Kyle Railroad. The Kyle Railroad is a short line railroad that operates predominantly in Kansas, although we do move west into Colorado. And really, when you think short line, think first mile, last mile service. We're really that critical connection for many egg customers, small manufacturers to the national supply chain. So we're kind of that regional airline that's connecting you to the larger hubs. So a customer shipping a car from Kansas can access the broader national and international market. As you've heard today, this bill would combine two very highly successful programs and two highly oversubscribed programs. I think maybe Matt can speak more to it. In this last round, there were over almost $19 million in applications for $5 million in funding. Really what this bill would do would continue to help railroads, short line railroads, customers, and in turn then communities make critical investments in a key area, and that's safe, efficient rail transportation. Stakeholders at KDOT have called investments in short line railroads the best highway preservation tool, that you have in this state. It would also leverage private capital dollars. So when we hear that $5 million or $10 million in combined program, there is a match requirement for both customers and railroads to make in that program. So you're taking private capital dollars, leveraging the grant program dollars, and making a larger investment in key areas. It also, as Randy mentioned, removes trucks from roadways. Trucks are not a bad thing. They also provide critical first mile, last mile service, but it does help with the pavement damage that are caused by trucks and move some of that freight over to the railroads, which in turn then provide a safe and efficient mode of transportation for customers. It also ensures, as I mentioned, access to the national freight rail network. For years, decades really, there was a deferred maintenance cost associated with short line railroads. Short line rail went out of business largely in Kansas. Over the past couple of decades, it's started to come back. There's been millions of dollars in capital investment in short line railroads, and with our customers, we've been able to see a large increase in the amount of carloads moving by short line rail, and in turn to the national freight rail network. So in turn, this competitive transportation option in short line rail ensures customers are competitive in their markets and can pass along savings to their producers as well. So you have my written testimony, so I don't want to keep going on and just being repetitive, but I stand by for any questions.
Committee questions. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. You brought up a couple of things. One, you mentioned that there is a match with the grants, but don't you get a tax credit on that money that you're matching?
Senator, the way that the tax credit is set up is for short line railroad infrastructure improvement is on a project basis. So typically, I don't believe that you can double dip between an investment in short line rehabilitation and then a grant project separately.
Okay. I just like clarification. I'm not saying no. I just want to understand what we're getting into, eyes wide open. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I know that it's been class 2 and 3 all along, and I'm just wondering, this may be for KDOT. Does class 1 have access to state funds also? And if I may, I noticed there's no sunset, but there are parameters that are restricted. Is that new language, or is that with the current grant?
So, Senator, I can speak to, I know that class 1s are not eligible under this program. There was an amendment in the House committee that prohibited class 1s from utilizing or applying for this program, but maybe KDOT can speak more to that.
Yeah, I'd just be curious, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to the fact that class 1s are ineligible and we do not have a state-funded program that supports class 1 applications.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the original program, were class 1s qualified?
No.
But the original bill, they were?
The original Bill?
The previous gentleman
No.
said they were,
I believe the amendment was to clarify that they remained ineligible.
okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so they don't get any funds at all, Class 1?
We can support Class 1s, I believe, through federal programs, should they want to partner on that.
And that would be my question. If we cap this amount through legislation, what if there's more funds needed? Would they have to come, or does KDOT have some leeway?
Well, we do have our multimodal pot of funds, which within the Ike legislation or the Eisenhower, there is room for maneuverability between the modal programs to fill the need of other modes. However, all of our modal programs are pretty much oversubscribed and exhaust all of that funding opportunity to where we don't see that activity just yet.
And I think it's only going to get worse with the infrastructure needs right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, committee. Further questions? Seeing none. Do we have any other proponents wishing to testify? Seeing none, are there any opponents? Seeing none, any neutrals? None. We'll close the hearing on 2335. Committee, I do want to note 2 handouts that were submitted. We had some late testimony that came in on House Bill 2019. Also had the follow-up from the bill we worked yesterday on 2149, saying that Department of Revenue liked the January 1st, 25 date. With that, committee, I'd like to turn our attention to working a couple of bills. I would like to look at 2298. Adam, if you could give us a briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2298 would designate the portion of I-435 in Johnson County as the Officer Donald Burton Gamblin Jr. Memorial Highway. The section of highway would be I-435 from the junction with Shawnee Mission Parkway, then north to the junction with Holiday Drive. Signs would be placed once the Secretary of Transportation has received the required costs plus 50%.
Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Be nice to get it in the conference. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question first, if I might, for the revisor. I've driven that stretch of highway many times. Is it about a 2-mile stretch of highway? I'm just trying to figure that. It's 2 or 4 miles. Is that about right?
Be honest, Senator, I've looked at it on the map. It used to be, the original bill had a different set. I'm not sure how much further. I think it went to Johnson Drive, and then they extended it to Holiday Drive. And to be honest with you, I just don't know how far.
I think Johnson Drive is about exit 6, and Holiday Drive is about exit 8 or so. But anyway, just curious. I'm happy to make the motion to move it favorably out of committee for passage.
I think I would like to amend it.
Oh, okay. Well, I withdraw my motion then.
Adam, I'd like to offer a motion to amend the enacting date to the register. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Corson. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Amendment is adopted. We're back on the bill. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to make the motion to move House Bill 2298 as amended favorably for passage.
With the motion, do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Corson. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Committee, I'd like to turn our attention to the bill we heard yesterday, 2019. Adam, can you give me a briefing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2019 would establish the conditions for when a transportation network company, also known as a TNC driver, would be an independent contractor for the TNC. The conditions for such a driver, for them to be qualified as the independent contractor, would be that the TNC does not have specific hours when the driver must work. The TNC does not limit the person from driving on other TNC networks. The TNC does not limit the person from working other jobs. And the TNC and the driver have agreed in writing that the driver is an independent contractor for the TNC.
Committee, we heard yesterday there was some concerns about this expanding out. And Adam, do you have an amendment? As he's passing out, committee, this amendment is just to clarify that this is only between transportation network companies. They were worried about, we heard testimony, they were worried about some expansion. I would make that motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Cluse. Any further discussion? Seeing none, committee, all those in favor of adopting the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Amendment is adopted. Back on the bill. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? It's been moved. We pass it out favorably as amended. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Bowers. Further discussion. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will probably be voting no. I will be voting no on this bill, mainly because I think an organization such as Uber and Lyft, who was the main proponents for the bill and speaking to the driving as the drivers as independent contractors. For the number 4 on this, the TNC and the driver have agreed in writing as an independent contractor. I think it leaves out a lot of information when we just say independent contractor and the liability issues, the protections, and the workman's comp and everything else that goes within that area. So I don't believe they should be considered as an employee, but I'm going to be voting no on this one for all of those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The noes wish to be recorded? Yes, please. Both noes, Senator Reddy and Senator Corson, wish to be recorded as no. Committee, it is my intention on working the bill that we heard today, Tuesday. Seeing no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned.